The wind howled across the desert plains like a spirit crying through the night. Clouds churned above, swollen and black, while forks of lightning split the sky wide open. Rain hammered the earth in sheets, soaking everything it touched, turning the dust into rivers of mud. Two sisters moved through that storm, their figures small against the vast and merciless land. Both wore dresses of soft buckskin, clinging heavy to their skin, and each step left them trembling from cold. One carried a wool blanket, wrapped tight across her shoulders, though it did little against the freezing downpour. The younger, lips blue and teeth chattering, stumbled beside her. They were daughters of the Apache, children of warriors and healers, raised with the wisdom of the mountains and rivers. But tonight, none of that knowledge shielded them from the storm's fury. Their hair clung to their faces, their moccasins squelched with every step, and the fire of their endurance burned dangerously low. In the distance, through the veil of rain, a light flickered. The older sister saw at first a lantern, glowing faint and golden against the storm. She gripped her sister's arm and pointed. Hope surged through their weary bodies as they pushed forward, fighting against the wind. The light belonged to a ranch. Its fences stretched like dark skeletons across the land, and at the center stood a wooden house, rough and weathered but standing strong against the storm. Smoke curled from its chimney, and through the rain the warm light of a lantern beckoned. The sisters reached the porch, boots sinking in the muddy earth. They hesitated before the heavy wooden door, hearts pounding. For Apaches, the houses of settlers were rarely safe. Too often, such doors had been slammed in their people's faces, or worse, opened with rifles pointed at them. Still, the storm roared louder, and lightning struck so close the ground itself shook. They had no choice. The elder sister raised her hand and knocked. Moments stretched long. Then, the door creaked open. A man stood in the doorway, broad-shouldered. His long leather coat dripped rainwater onto the wooden floor. The sisters shivered, clutching the blanket tighter. Behind them, the storm screamed. In front of them, this stranger's judgment would decide their fate. The man's grip tightened on the doorframe. Finally, in a voice as rough as gravel, he spoke. "If you cross this threshold," he said slowly, "your lives will never be the same again." For a long moment, the sisters stood frozen, caught between the storm's fury and the man's hard gaze. Rain streamed from their hair and faces, soaking the porch beneath them. The older sister steadied her breath, summoning the courage to speak. "We ask only for shelter," she said, her voice trembling but steady enough to carry her plea. "Just until the storm passes." The man's eyes narrowed. His weathered face revealed little, but behind his silence lay years of wounds and memories. To him, Apache faces were not unfamiliar. His hand twitched, almost reaching for the rifle leaned against the wall inside. But something, maybe the desperation in their eyes, maybe the echo of his own daughters long gone, held him still. The younger sister took a small step forward, clutching the wool blanket as though it were a shield. Her lips quivered as she whispered, "Please." Thunder cracked overhead, shaking the rafters of the porch. The rancher let out a slow breath, his jaw tight. With a sharp motion, he stepped aside and pulled the door wider. "Get in," he muttered. The sisters exchanged a glance of relief and hurried inside. Warmth wrapped around them instantly, the glow of a lantern, the crackle of fire in the hearth, and the smell of wood smoke and leather. It was a humble cabin, built from rough-hewn logs, but to them it felt like a fortress against the storm. They stood awkwardly near the door, dripping water onto the floorboards. The man shut the door behind them with a heavy thud. "You're far from your people," he said finally, his deep voice filling the silence. "What brings you out here?" The older sister hesitated. To reveal too much was dangerous, but to lie might be worse. She spoke carefully. "We were traveling to find kin. The storm caught us." The rancher studied her for a moment. He didn't press further, though suspicion flickered in his eyes. Instead, he motioned toward the fire. "Warm yourselves, but understand, this isn't charity. You stay until the rain breaks, and then you move on." The sisters nodded quickly, grateful for even that much. They moved closer to the fire, holding out their hands toward the flames. Their clothes steamed faintly as the heat drew the water from the fabric. Slowly, color returned to their cheeks. The younger one whispered, "Thank you," her voice soft but sincere. The man didn't respond. He stood by the table, watching them with arms folded, as though weighing whether he had made a mistake. Shadows flickered across his lined face, and in his silence there was a heaviness, the weight of history, of grudges unspoken. The storm outside raged on, battering the walls, but within that cabin, a different kind of storm had begun. 3 souls, bound by circumstance, now shared a fragile space, and though they spoke little, each one knew this night was far from over. The fire's warmth slowly loosened the sisters' stiff muscles, yet their hearts remained tight with caution. The rancher's cabin was a shelter, yes, but also a cage of uncertainty. They could feel the man's eyes on them as they dried, as though he studied every twitch of their hands, every glance they exchanged. The older sister straightened, determined not to appear weak. "We will trouble you no longer than the storm demands," she said, her voice carrying the dignity of her people. The rancher gave no reply. Instead, he dragged a wooden chair across the floor and sat heavily, the chair creaking beneath his weight. His wide-brimmed hat rested now on the table beside a half-burned lantern, revealing hair streaked with gray. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the thunder outside and the hiss of the fire. At last, the younger sister gathered courage. "You live alone here?" she asked timidly. The man's eyes narrowed, but there was no heat of anger in them, only weariness. The elder sister bowed her head slightly. "Then we will be gone with the morning light." He leaned back, boots scraping against the wood. "If the morning lets you leave. Storms like this, they have a way of swallowing people whole." The sisters exchanged a quick, uneasy look. His words felt half warning, half omen. The cabin creaked as wind battered its sides. The fire spat sparks, casting restless shadows on the walls. A silence thicker than rain settled again, but beneath it pulsed the question neither sister dared ask. "What does this man truly want?" At length, the rancher broke the quiet. "Name's Carter," he said abruptly, as if the silence itself had weighed too heavy. "This land's mine. Every fence post, every stone. Cost me near everything to keep it." The sisters listened but did not respond. They knew pride when they heard it, and pain hiding beneath. "And you?" Carter's eyes bore into them. "What are your names?" The elder hesitated, then answered. "I am Tatsi. My sister is Naeli." He repeated the names under his breath, foreign on his tongue, before nodding slowly. "You carry yourselves proud. That'll keep you alive, or get you killed." Naeli shivered, though the fire was hot on her skin. Tatsi's hand slipped protectively over her sister's. Outside, the storm wailed with no sign of mercy. Inside, 3 strangers sat with walls between them thicker than the logs of the cabin. Yet, in the crackle of the firelight, the first threads of an unspoken bond had been drawn, fragile, uncertain, but strong enough to hold them through the night. And still, none of them knew how deeply this meeting would carve into the rest of their lives. The storm showed no mercy. Hours dragged on, each roll of thunder shaking the cabin's walls, each flash of lightning searing white across the windows. The land beyond was a sea of mud and shadow, but inside, the 3 souls kept their distance. As though bound by invisible lines they dared not cross. Tatsi sat close to the fire, her dark eyes fixed on the flames, the hunger that gnawed at them, the rain that had caught them in its teeth. Beside her, Naeli leaned against the wool blanket, still trembling though the heat had begun to return to her skin. Carter rose from his chair and crossed the cabin. His boots thudded against the floor, the weight of each step heavy with years of labor. He lifted a kettle from the stove and poured steaming water into a tin cup, then set it on the table without looking at them. "Drink," he said curtly. The sisters hesitated. Hospitality was rare when offered to their people by settlers, and suspicion coiled in Tatsi's stomach. Still, she could feel her sister's need, so she moved carefully to the table, lifted the cup, and brought it to Naeli's lips. The younger sister drank, steam curling against her face, and for a moment, the fear in her eyes softened. Carter returned to his chair, leaning back as though exhausted, yet his gaze never wandered far from them. The firelight carved deep lines across his face, and in those shadows lived the memories of battles and losses neither sister could yet imagine. "You came here by chance," he said suddenly, "but chance doesn't always come without reason." Tatsi frowned. "The reason is the storm, nothing more." He studied her, lips pressing thin. Maybe the storm only brought you where you were meant to be. The words hung heavy in the room, heavier than the thunder outside. Naeli shifted uneasily, glancing at her sister, unsure how to answer. Silence stretched again, broken only by the rain against the roof. "You'll stay tonight. Tomorrow, we'll see." The sisters nodded. It was the most they could hope for, and though his words offered no promise of kindness, they offered survival. Tatsi guided Naeli closer to the fire. The warmth grew stronger, but so did her unease. Carter's tone carried weight, the weight of decisions yet to be made. She could not read him, could not know if the man before them would become their protector or their enemy. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, under one roof, the fate of three strangers was beginning to weave itself together. A fragile thread spun in firelight and silence. The fire burned low as the night deepened, its glow painting the cabin walls in restless amber. The storm outside was relentless, waves of thunder rolling across the land. But within the wooden walls another kind of tension pulsed quietly, steady as a heartbeat. Naeli had drifted into a light sleep, her head resting against Tatsi's shoulder, the blanket pulled up to her chin. Tatsi stroked her sister's damp hair, her eyes never leaving Carter. Every move he made, every shift of his weight, she noted like a warrior watching an opponent. Trust was not something easily given, not when the world beyond their people had taught them to expect betrayal. Carter sat at the table, hands clasped before him. His gaze was distant, fixed not on them but on memories far away. The lantern's glow highlighted the scar running across his left cheek, a mark of violence long past. He broke the silence at last, his voice low, as though speaking more to himself than to the sisters. "Years ago, I had a family, a wife, 2 little girls." His words slowed, heavy. "The fever took them, left me with this land and nothing else. Since then, the only company I've known is the storm and the soil." Tatsi said nothing, but she felt a shift within her. Behind the hard face and rough words, there was a man carved by loss, not just anger. "My people know this truth well." Their eyes met across the firelight, and for the first time, there was no suspicion, only recognition, like two travelers passing each other on the same broken road. Yet the peace was fragile. A sharp crack outside broke it apart, not thunder this time, but the sound of wood splintering. Carter rose swiftly, hand darting for the rifle leaned near the door. His posture shifted from weary host to hardened defender in a breath. Tatsi pulled Naeli upright, her instincts flaring. "What is it?" she demanded. Carter moved to the window, peering into the rain-swept night. Lightning flashed, revealing dark shapes moving near the fence line. "Riders," he muttered, jaw tightening, "and not the kind you want knocking." Fear knifed through Naeli's chest. Tatsi stood firm, placing herself between her sister and the door. Carter turned, his voice sharp and decisive now. "You wanted shelter. Tonight, that means standing under this roof. Come what may. If you stay, you'll fight beside me. If not..." He gestured toward the door and the raging storm beyond. The sisters exchanged a glance. Their answer came not in words, but in the fire that lit Tatsi's eyes. They would stay. And with that unspoken choice, the fragile thread binding them tightened. Whatever storm waited outside, they would face it together.